Hey, welcome to the Gym Club podcast.
Welcome. This is like the intro, but it's not the intro.
Exactly.
My name's Adam.
Okay, Adam, welcome. You are the guest today.
I am serving as the guest. You're also kind of the guest, but I'm going to pretend to be the guest.
Yeah, well, I mean, I am a guest, but I don't act like a guest. I'm going to come over and take my shoes off, put my feet on the couch.
We're all honored to be here, and we all are hosting each other. No, but we had some rescheduling that happened, and you and I have always talked about wanting to do an episode together where it was just us getting to talk about our stories a little bit, and people ask about that sometimes. And yeah, so we thought this was a good time to do it. I'm pretty excited to get to jump in. I'm excited for what we've got today. I think it'll be relevant for the people who listen in on here.
Yeah, I feel like it'll really resonate with our audience. So, Adam, we've done about 15 episodes or so, so far. And we've talked to several, I'd say several. I think several is like above 7. So we've talked to several, entrepreneurs, but we haven't really had an opportunity to like explore our own, or not explore, but just kind of give people, the listeners, a little background about what we have had going on. So where did you start in all of this? And like, was it your plan to be a CEO of a major corporation?
No, definitely wasn't. It definitely wasn't. My entrepreneurial journey or creative journey started in, I think when I was procrastinating in college, and I was really fascinated by the internet and was really into all of this stuff. Like blogs were just coming online. Our whole like dorm was interconnected on its Ethernet, so we could everybody could upload their iTunes music to the folders, and we had access to like the whole dorm's music, which then later I think people got put in jail or fined like a lot of money for doing things like that. But I was before people were getting in trouble for things like that. It just worked. So anyways, all of that to be like, there was things that were so powerful and connective and all these technologies that nobody really paid attention to. And then I graduated college in 2008, which was a terrible time to graduate from college because all entry-level jobs were going to people with 5 years of experience. And as someone who I never understood why that was, but as someone who hires people now, I understand why. You're like, you throw up your entry-level salary as the job opening, and you have people who have been doing stuff for 5 years wanting to show up and do that job. You're in a really, that's a nice hiring spot to be at. So anyways, I just had to figure out how to do a bunch of my own stuff. And I kept trying to get businesses to build websites and use social media and do those other stuff. And it just was really hard to persuade people that it was important. And then eventually the stuff became obvious, and it was a lot easier to just say, I can do that for you, because people were starting to like want it themselves. So it just started like quite a bit early before the market was ready for it. And then the market was ready, and I was experienced at that point because I had done a bunch of those things for people. And so I understood how to guide people through all of it. So it just started off as a curiosity and a fascination, and I just kept at it and stayed loud about it, and the world caught up to me.
Hey, you're a trailblazer, man. You definitely, as someone who works pretty close to you, you know what I mean? You're definitely someone I feel like thinks about the future. You're like, hey man, you can do this and this. And I'm like, bro, tomorrow's not even here. So I could definitely see you being ahead of the curve, let's say.
Yeah. Appreciate that. It's cool.
Of course, man.
But that's yeah. So we got into the Wonder Jam, like overall. The Wonder Jam started in 2013. I'd worked at a couple other agencies. I didn't love how small businesses were treated there. I felt like people were offering the business models of the agencies I worked in didn't lend themselves to charging the right prices or delivering the right sort of thing for small businesses at the stage that they were at. So it's not even like, I didn't think they were ripping people off. I just thought it doesn't really work. It's a wrong model. And Allie, my wife, had been freelancing for a while, very successfully, had done a great job. And I was like, I'll just join you and we can both do our own thing kind of. And so we kind of like worked together, but on our own way for a while, and just kept, it all just was like, the evolution from 2013 until today has just been a continuous series of listening to our customers and audience and ourselves and thinking about what should happen next. And I mean, there's like all kinds of opportunities came up from there. So it was not overly, I'm a pretty normal person. You know, like I'm not like, I don't have like an incredible business background, and I'm just listened to people and stayed curious, and where I saw connections, I followed through with them. And now we're sitting here with about 5 different sister brands that have all kind of evolved out of that space. You know, it's kind of been nurtured. The Gem Club is one of them. And yeah, and you're here, and we're having a good time. You are also pretty entrepreneurial. Maybe you haven't started a whole bunch of businesses, but you're pretty scrappy, blue collar.
For
Blue
sure.
collar is the wrong word about I mean blue collar. I mean you are, but that's not what I meant. I
Well,
meant
like we could that's a like I feel like that's a pretty good term for the Midwest, you know? Like we all are blue collar.
you're like
kinda.
figure it out. Like you're like, I don't know, I can figure stuff out. And I learned that about you. We met because you had worked for one of our clients in the past, and we became friends. And then I got to know your curiosity and your like how you understood media, and you had like an eye and an ear for nuanced things, and you weren't using that in your career, really. Like you weren't using that at work. That was like a thing that you
Right.
did at home or on the side or in your free time. And I kept being like, oh my gosh, I watched so many people really struggle with some of this professionally, and they could use some help. You seem to have the skills to do it, but you kind of had to get pushed into, not pushed or pulled, I don't know what the right word is,
Yeah, man.
summoned into this space. What was that like for, like, you started helping with the podcast around March, right, of
Top of the year.
2021. What was going on before that kind of led you into this space?
So I had been doing a number of things. Like one of my just kind of like I don't know what you could call it, you know, say like a ace in the hole. Is that how that phrase goes? Something like that, man. But retail was always just kind of like my thing. I'm like, I can be nice to people and I can sell clothes. So my first job, I was actually a lifeguard in an indoor water park. And so I'm pretty sure that I'm using like a smaller percentage than what's like medically appropriate of my lungs just because of all the chlorine. You know, it was rough, man, in the summers. But yeah, so I like I said, I lifeguarded, and then I got into retail, and I really like that, and so I was doing that, and then I I tried to. There's a story here about doing new things and having a bad team around you. You know what I'm saying? And this isn't related to anybody that would be listening to this, you know, but I tried to sell things. It was the beginning of this year. I tried to move into a retail position, rather, let's say, that was larger scale items. And as I was trying to acclimate to doing that, because I've heard people say that I'm like as nice as the day is long. And so I don't have a problem talking to people, you know, anybody, like older people, younger people, everybody. But I could not get these people to buy the thing I was trying to sell them. And it was so bad that like it became torture, because the people would be like telling my boss that I was doing a good job, or I would talk to a customer and they would be like, they should let you sell those things. And I'm like, I'm actively trying to sell you when I just don't think that I'm obviously not good at this. So I tried that for a little bit, and it was, it was rough. Let's just put it
I
like
just
that.
remember listening to you at that time. You would talk about, like, I remember you got that job and you're selling stuff. This was during COVID. There's like a couple of small business buddies who may listen to this, who may think we're talking about them, and it's not. We're not talking about them. I can like hear what you're doing when you're like making sure that they note that. But I remember listening to you because I've done sales before. I've had sales jobs, and listening to the things that you were doing. And I kept being like, man, is Deangelo bad at this, surprisingly? Or is it just like doesn't work? And I kept like asking more and more and more questions. I was like, oh, you're not in a supportive, like, the organization is not on helping you be successful.
Exactly.
And if you're doing sales, it's really hard, like, to do it in a space, you know, that isn't supporting you. And if you're successful in a space that's not supporting you, leave and go to a different space that does support you, and you'll be even more successful. I am curious. I'm going to jump into like sort of your like media.
For sure.
Where did your appetite and understanding of media, podcast, audio, video, Like, where did that all come from? Because that's all self-taught. That was all, that's not, you didn't go to school for that stuff. You didn't have like a job that trained you on getting into those things. What was where did that come from?
Man, I think it was just like, it's a natural thing. So growing up, it was just like always music, and there were a lot of different brands offering sound systems. And so like at my house, we might have Panasonic. At someone else's house, they might have a Zenith sound system. At someone else's house, they might have I'm going to say this wrong, but I want to say AIWA. It's AIWA. But yeah, and so being able like to pick up differences in those sorts of like sound systems, and even in the car, and like the clock radio, I think was one of the first times that I ever was like, that sounds bad. This radio doesn't sound good. And so like you couple that with, there was a point, I think like right around high school, I just stopped watching television. And it was because there was a bunch of kids at the school that were like, I don't really watch TV. And I was like, what do y'all do? Y'all are corny. And so as I would like explore other things to do, I'm like, oh, television is pretty, last thought, it's a last minute thought of mine. So I wasn't watching TV. And then I feel like I'm going to jump out on a limb here and say that like Apple were some of the first people to start podcasting, because like it was a podcast app, right? It was like Apple, and
Yeah.
Because it was like iPod, and so they were like, this is a podcast, and wasn't a radio show, it was pod. So those came out, and it took a while for me to actually listen to one. Like it was just radio shows for me, and so there were still a lot of good radio shows with like comedians, and then once that kind of subsided, I dove into the podcast world. And then within the past couple of years, I found myself only listening to podcasts or watching them like exclusively. So what that does is it kind of forces you to recognize the differences in setups and content, and even the way that a person speaks. Like a person's cadence might piss you off. Like someone might be listening to this and be like, I really don't like how these guys talk. And it's like, hey, unfortunately, this is how we are. But yeah, man, so I have a natural curiosity for things that I like. And so as I'm like interested in something, I'm like, well, what about? And next thing I know, I have, let's call it a paperback book's worth of knowledge on, some random topic.
Yeah. I remember when we were first talking about a podcast and doing one together, we'd always talked about it. We talked about it for a long time. We were like, we got to figure out a reason to do one, just because we made up like a whole, we never had an approach, right? We never had like a thing where we figured out like, oh, this could be our approach.
For sure.
But we liked sitting and talking to each other. So like any natural thing, that should be a podcast. But yeah, I remember you having so much insight into things that I had spent, just as we were trying to get a podcast up and going, and I've worked with other people of getting them up and going. You knew things that I had spent a lot of time trying to figure out the answer to. You just sort of inherently knew them and had a really good sense of what was interesting and not interesting, and that sometimes there's a lot of pressure to make things way too professional inside of podcasting, make everything perfect rather than interesting. And you're like, I watch a bunch of podcasts where people are sitting on couches with mics that aren't that good, and they don't even have an interface, and it's not perfect, but it's fine, it's good, but the content's really interesting. The focus or the topic is very interesting. It's very relevant. It's very interesting people. So it was obvious to me. I remember I asked you so many times, like, how do you know this stuff? Like, where does this come from? And sometimes I think if you're someone listening to this, you find yourself in a spot where people are asking you, like, it becomes really obvious that you're an expert because everybody's asking you about this stuff. Then if you want to make a career out of something, or if you want to change your career and take a different trajectory, that probably is a good spot to start, because you're probably pretty far ahead of the curve at that point.
Yeah, that's what I realized, man. I'm like, oh, okay. There's some nerves you have to get over, but outside of like maintaining your composure, you're like, I can 100% handle this. And like all the things that you would ask me, like, hey man, I want to put music on this and I want to do this and that. And like, even before you had the software, or while I was like learning the software, you were telling me like, I want to do this and that. I'm like, hey, if this software doesn't do it, I will find a way, And I think that's a part of that scrappiness that the Wonder Jam kind of attracts. Actually, yeah, let's speak a little bit about that, Adam. Like, you also are a person who's not like, you didn't go to CEO school, you're not like, have a degree in business management, unless you do. And
No, I don't.
Honestly, and I don't know. But you know what I mean? So how does that, like, how do you get to there? Because, like, okay, boom, you are an entrepreneur. You know, a lot of people are entrepreneurs, but a lot of people own their job. And there's a difference, you know. It's like if you own your job, you can't really scale that because it doesn't work without you. You built something that, like, was kind of like that, and then you expanded into making it, you know, so you're not the centerpiece of it. Talk to that a little bit.
I went from a pretty natural progression of just being happy that I got paid to do something that I found myself being mildly interested in. As a recession graduate, I was working at UPS loading boxes in the trucks, and I did a pretty good job at that. And then I got moved into management really fast because I could talk to people and I could kind of motivate people to try hard, and I was good at listening to people, I guess. And I was good enough relative to my peers in that space. I'm not saying you don't have to be that incredible to move up there. I just was so happy to be able to keep doing the stuff that I was doing. And just by nature of making websites for businesses, I got to learn from those people over time. And people would say things like every time we made a website, or every time I'd even have a conversation, even if they didn't hire us to make a website, but I get to know and like meet someone else's business. I've got to do that 1,000 times. And I am very curious, and I very much respect and admire people who take risks and try to do something that they care about doing, or try to build a business in a way that they want to, or, you know, kind of do things in their own way. And that's just who we seem to attract. And it was very, I feel like I got an MBA through 1,000 conversations and just asking a lot of questions. And it was something I learned really early. I had a friend in college who was one of those people that when you would hang out with them, they would just ask a million questions. Sometimes I'd be like, you tell me something that you care about. You know, like they'd be like, oh, those pants are cool. Where'd you get those? Why did you pick them out? How do you try stuff on? And I'm just like, what do you think? Like, do you have an opinion? But they were just a never ending, they just asked a lot of questions. Mm-hmm. And I always felt good around them. And then I got really great sales training, and I learned that really great sales training is also asking a lot of really good questions and being good at asking questions. So I ended up going into meetings with people who I didn't really understand their business. I had no real, I remember I was helping a rapper with this crowdfunding campaign they were doing for a music video. And I got an email, someone asking me to do that because I make websites. Like, I don't know anything about that stuff. There's like whole specialists about doing all of that. There's whole practices around all of it. And I was like, I'll help, you know, whatever, for free, because this sounds cool. And I like rap music, and I would love to be connected to this and learn more about it. And I would go to these meetings, and I probably didn't even add much value to the whole process, but I just asked a million questions about all of it and the business of it and what they're trying to do and how it all worked. And I don't know that rapper was like the pinnacle of business knowledge to learn from, but I learned how some people think, and I've got to interact with other artists who have figured out things differently, and you're like, oh yeah, he does it this way, she does it this way. And all of that is just listening. It's just a lot of like empathy and listening and trying to figure out what people are going through, and then using Google and to finding the answers. And so people are like, I'm trying to make a business contract with somebody where I get equity, but it's in a different manner than before. And I'm like, oh, that sounds really common. That's a very common sense way of doing business that isn't really present in a lot of the rest of the world. I'm gonna go try and find other people that are doing that. What does that look like? What is that, you know? And there's just so much to learn. There's so much documented about how businesses are run, and there's so much available information on the internet about how businesses are run. But then there's also this whole sort of like sub genre of information that is very hidden, like legal stuff, operational things, specific HR information. You know, there's a lot of information that's like, I think you can get really far really quick. And then after that, you've got to become a real researcher, and you got to build a network of people who you're like, I have a person who is almost doing an A+ job on my team, but they're not quite doing an A+ job. How do I help them adjust that thing? You know, like, how do I help somebody? Or I've got somebody on my team who is in a whole different time zone than the rest of our team is in, like a pretty aggressively different time zone. How do we make that all work? And there's that information you have to go dig for. It's becoming more common now, but it's just finding problems and going and solving them. And it's that same sort of like scrappy or like, I will figure it out mentality of I'm going to take responsibility for trying to figure out the answer to this problem. And you just do that repeatedly for 15 years. And at the end of it, you've got some experience underneath your belt.
There it is. Just rinse, wash, and repeat, huh?
Yeah. I mean, at one point, so it's the CEO title, it's kind of funny. Like if you ever meet somebody with a business the size of ours who has the title of CEO, you can giggle at them a little bit. It's a little silly because a CEO typically reports to a board of advisors. We don't have a board right now. And a CEO typically, there's certain things about that job of a CEO that is the reason you would call yourself a founder or principal rather than a CEO.
Right.
But I remember at a time, Allie and I started this business together. We brought in another partner, Ashley, about a year and a half ago. And in doing all of that, I started to really try to figure out like, what did I want to become? Like, what did I want to be in this space? It was really clear. Ashley makes things and sells them to people. Allie makes things and sells them to people. And I was kind of the junk drawer of all of that stuff. And I always found myself, I'm like either the janitor or the CEO, which is how CEOs or founders talk about what they're doing often is, I'm trying to like create a system and structure that works really well, but also when there's things that don't work really well, I got to go pick those up, So I was doing all the finances, budgeting, projecting, 5-year plans, hiring, and also like going and refilling the water at the studio so that there's something to drink if people want to have a water when they're here, which is not really like a CEO job per se. So I use the term of CEO. I had read a book, which I'd recommend to anybody who feels like leadership in business is their thing, but they're not sure how it looks. There's a book called The CEO Next Door, which is a sort of a myth-busting type of book around what does being successful in a leadership role at a company actually look like versus thinking that you need to become like the famous executives or CEOs that you see on Twitter or Instagram or whatever who are, being big shots. Like, what does it actually look like to be really successful? There's a lot of data done by it. It is very inclusive in the way that it talks about things. It was an eye-opening and illuminating book. And I was like, I want to be like that. That's me. That the way it described being successful, I was like, I want to aspire to that. So I gave myself the title of CEO. Probably founder would be a better title for the size that we are. But it's the thing that in 10 years, I want to be like, I've grown into this. I've grown into what this means. I want to have a board in place. I want to have these things in place someday. So how do you get from like wherever I started to wherever we are now is you just listen a lot, stay curious and ask a bunch of questions and research and read. And I still feel like behind always because I put myself in spots where I'm like solving weird problems.
Let's talk about that because I'm sure like, there are listeners out there that might feel the same way. One of the things that I always like to say is like, you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. You know what I mean? So you have to be able to be vulnerable, but you also have to know how you learn.
Yes.
Because, say like, okay, I know this is going to be difficult. And then you have to figure out how to do it. But if you don't understand how you learn, and that comes with even like, which medium is the best way for me to take in this information? Would it be reading it? Would it be watching a video? And you also have to like deal with the emotions that may come up with it. The first time it might not come out as you expect. The first few times it probably won't come out as you expect, but you have to keep at it. Like that's something that I learned, there was a couple of times where I'm like, this sounds terrible. We would record a podcast and I would like have to sit through and like grit my teeth as I listen to it and edit it. And I'm like, okay, cool. So then you learn a few ways to like mitigate some of that. And then you run into another problem. And so it's like, yeah, those are my 2 pieces of advice. Like know how you learn and also be comfortable being uncomfortable.
How do you, if you were going to describe how you learn, because I know how I learn and I know I've described it. How do you learn? If you were like, if I was like, hey, I'm going to give you a new topic. How do you, let's say we haven't done a lot of video stuff, but we will someday probably, right?
For sure.
So for like, hey, by the end of next year, you need to be good at video things. How would you tackle all of that?
Well, I love video, and it's just because when I read, my mind does too many things. Sometimes it's hard for me to turn it off. So I might be reading and I have some other thoughts. And with video, I feel like it's easier for me to have those other thoughts and still take in this information. So the person may be talking and I may not be looking directly at the screen, but I might be able to just kind of like, okay, I can still hear them. But maybe let me try to do this in practice. So let me try to write this down. I've never been like a person that reads the directions and then like does the thing. I've done that a couple of times with like some IKEA put togethers.
Yeah.
That's it, man.
Yeah.
I like to like envelop myself in the work because then I feel like I'm like fully, my attention is 100% on what I'm doing. And I also feel like when I block out outside like opinions and just even like sometimes people being in the room is like too much for me. So I might turn on music and like put my headphones in to kind of like envelop myself and like take myself out of where I am, put myself into mental space where I'm like, okay, it's time to learn.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I always find myself I like to do things without any instruction at all. And I just try to figure it out. And I don't know why I'm like that. It's a defect. It's for sure not. It's for sure. I find that if I wait for something to be perfect, I will never do anything. And I mean that in an extreme way for myself. And that's a common thing. Like perfectionism is an issue. I don't have a perfectionism issue.
Mm-hmm.
There's like two examples I could think of just in personal life, but in business it's the same. I just got some for my birthday. I wanted to get stand-up paddle boards for me. I've got two of them. I was like, oh, me and somebody can always go do a stand-up paddle board sometime. It's a pretty chill thing, kind of fun, but also kind of easy to get into. And I get all these things. You got to like inflate stuff. You got to do all of it. And I like doing all that myself. I don't like doing the experimental thing in front of people. And it was Allie was out of the house, was by myself at home. And I was at home and I got everything out and I inflated all of it in my living room on my own. And I was like, I want to make sure this makes sense. I want to figure out how to roll it up. How do you put it back away in the bag? Like, I got a whole like practice rep through all of it on my own. And then I took it out with a bunch of friends and I was like, oh, we can all do this together. I helped, show them how to do it. And then the first person I did it with was like, oh, I wasn't very good at explaining how to get onto it or off of it or like how to maneuver. It wasn't very good like guide to that. And then after that, I learned and I got really good at it. And now I probably could run a business like teaching people how to get into their stand-up paddleboards or whatever. And it was just like, I didn't read anything. I didn't look at a YouTube video. I probably should look at a YouTube video of some professional I learned things. I bought a really nice espresso machine also. Was like, we downgraded our car and we were buying a car and I was like, what about getting one that's significantly cheaper so we can get an espresso machine that's incredible? And so and Allie agreed to that. We've been drinking, so I think that helped with both of our negotiating skills. So we got it, and I was like, I'm just going to figure this out. And it's a very complicated machine with a lot of different parts, and it sort of made sense to me. But I didn't want to watch somebody walk me through how to do it correctly. I was like, I want to do it on my own. And so I did that for, I think, 3 months. And then one of my friends actually works for that company and he was leading a workshop and I went to it and I watched him make one shot of espresso, pull one shot, go through the process one time. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've been thinking that it will automatically shut off at the right time and I need to turn it off at the right time. So I had been my shots were being pulled at like 60 or 65 seconds, which will ruin all of them and they'll taste terrible. And I had been so frustrated by it. And I refused to look up information. They should take like 30 seconds or 26 sometimes, depending on how you're doing it. But they tasted terrible. It's like if I served that to anybody and they told me it was good, they were lying to me or they don't know what they're talking about. But to me, I was like, that's how I do everything. I was like, when I first started figuring out how to do finances for a company that was like big enough that it had kind of complicated finances, I just made a spreadsheet and was like, I'm going to keep making this spreadsheet until I feel like I understand what's going on. I remember sitting out behind on our back patio at like 11 o'clock and staying out there till like 4 a.m, just being like, all right, so how do I know what's going on? And I don't understand. How do I know what's coming in the future? How do I know if we were profitable in the past? How do we I could have easily found a YouTube video that would have told me some basics in like 11 minutes. But I've never learned that way. I just like stay, I don't know. That's just how I learn. So if you were like, hey, you have to get good at video, I'd be like, I think I'm going to go record a bunch of stuff and try to edit a bunch of stuff. And then after I get some laps, I might like pull in some experts to teach me things.
And also, man, I am a very observant person. So it's like, sometimes you don't even have to tell me once, right? I can like look and see, and I'm like, okay, boom, boom, boom. Or like I'll watch podcasts and I'm like, oh, they got one mic set, or they got a one camera set up, single shot, and they are angling it to where it's like maximizing space. It's not a big production. They got some lights, and it's like I can pick all of this out, and I'm like, oh man.
Do you think you are an observant person?
For sure.
You notice things, right? Like if I look like I've been tired or beat up or I'm sad, you notice that real quick. You're very observant. Is that something that you think just is inherently natural in you, or is that something that is developed? Is that like a skill? If somebody was like, I want to become more observant, or are you like, you're not going to be like Deangelo, because Deangelo is like,
Yeah,
whatever.
I would say that it is innate, right? Like as a kid, I could like tell when people are upset, and I had a pretty good thing of making people like giggle, so I was always like trying to keep the spirits light. But then, I mean, as you get older and you have more relationships and friendships, you kind of develop it more. So, yeah, it's a bit developed, but like, there was some just natural caring tendencies that happened for me.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to ask you a question, a very specific one. You are self-taught in your career, what you're doing for a job right now, and what we would imagine you will continue to grow and develop and expand within. And you do a good job. Like you feel like you're doing a good job presently at those things. You should feel that way. I think you're doing a good job. We all think you're doing a good job.
Right? Thank you guys.
Yeah. That wasn't like, do you think you're doing a good job?
How do you feel about the things that you put out?
This is an employee review with Deangelo, and everyone just got so uncomfortable. Nobody is like, oh, I'd love to sit through someone's employee reviews publicly. That sounds awesome. Nobody even goes, oh my gosh.
Okay,
but so you self-taught and performing well in your self-taughtness, but also you're sort of still in your rookie season of your self-taught career, right? And you work at a company with a bunch of people who are self-taught and also aren't self-taught, went to school and studied and practiced and had other careers in the things that they're doing. So you sit next to people who are like, not have 10,000 hours of experience, have 100,000 hours of experience. Like they are experts. They are well seasoned. What does it feel like for you being good at what you're doing? Everyone agrees that you're good at what you're doing. And also sitting next to people who are extraordinary at what they're doing and have been pretty good at stuff for a decade.
Man, so that's a great question. I'm glad you asked. There's a young lady on our team, Allie. I'm not sure if you know Allie, but she is like really spectacular. She can draw, and her drawings are magnificent, and she does the website design, and then she does so many things. And she's really an inspiration to me, because I'm like, man, she's so multifaceted. It's so interesting. And it's like, it's really nice because these people inspire you. I don't feel like if I felt like I was the best person here, this would be the wrong place for me, And I've always felt like that. I'm like, if I can't learn anything, or if everyone's coming to me asking me questions, it's like I'm in the wrong spot. And she inspires me a lot. And then yourself, even, like, it's very comforting to know that like I can work on. There's like a pretty good list of things that I could like be like, hey, Adam, I'm about to do this. And they aren't directly related to my job, but you'll be like, okay, well, make sure you clock your time for it, where it's like, oh man, this is a job that supports me learning new things. There are people here that inspire me. I think that it comes with being comfortable with yourself, because some people, you know what I mean? Sometimes you can get around people and they start doing their thing and you're like, oh, that's really good. I don't know if I'll ever get to there, but it's like, you have to be comfortable with running a race. You have to know where you're at. And it's like, you can only be you. You can't be that person.
Yeah.
You can't be anybody else. So if you maximize your units, like you can't.
It's hard to remember that. I mean, I remember when I was at your spot in my world where I was like, okay, I think I'm actually really good and helpful at this stuff, and I've done enough. Like, I know a lot, and if someone has issues, I know how to figure it out. I've like learned enough to know how to solve problems. It was really difficult for me, and the reason I always remind people on our team, part of your job should be learning how to be better at your job, and you should do that during work hours. Like that's like a part of work. You don't have to do that at night and then, also do your whole job.
Yeah.
Is because I would have a terrible time. Like we would build websites for people and I'm trying to figure out something I don't know. And I wouldn't charge people for that learning stuff because I felt bad. I felt like, okay, I know I'm faking it. Or I feel like I'm faking it or I'm in it like imposter syndrome, or you hear all these sort of different ways of talking about that feeling of being like, okay, I know I'm good at this, but I'm also a little insecure. I imagine it's what it feels like playing with LeBron James or what people felt like playing with Michael Jordan, where at some point you'd just be like, or Kobe Bryant, you'd just be like, okay, it's hard for me to not just watch that person be awesome. And, someone's like, you should match them. I'm like, I don't think it's possible to match what those people are doing. And it feels sometimes working with Allie and Ashley in particular, who have been doing art since they were little kids, and been doing their thing, what they do now. They've been doing it since they were 6, it feels like that sometimes. We're like, man, I've been doing this for 15 years and I still have a lot of catching up to do because they still started way, way, way before I did. I'm not gonna be able to catch them. But I think that thing of being like, no, you just have to be yourself and still work, still put in effort and still try and be curious and keep learning. It's a hard thing. I think of you a lot that way. And I think of, we haven't had Evan on the podcast yet. He'll be on here at some point, but
shout out to Evan. Listen, Evan, I know you're listening. Shout out to you, Ev Diddy, my man.
So Evan is in that same spot of that you and I have been at different times, but is like in a career that he's good at, personally had passions and personality and wiring to be successful in this, but is also sitting next to people who have done their thing for a long time. And it gives you feelings for sure. When you sit in a room or when you sit I feel like that when I'm working with Allie and Ashley on things and I'm like, oh man, you all have, I hope I can keep up. Like, I hope I don't make this bad. I feel like the slow part, and if there's a relay race we're running in high school track, I'm like, I'm probably the slowest one. And I just want to make sure that I don't really ruin how amazing the rest of you are, so.
I think that you don't give yourself enough credit, Adam, because it's like I could say like you curated this team, right? You kind of put the pieces together or like put the, supporting pieces there to have people be brought in, you know what I mean? So nah, dog, you aren't.
Well, it feels, yeah. I feel, I've assembled teams of things where it has failed. So I'm also like, just because I put a team together doesn't guarantee that I'm succeeding.
That's real, man. That's real.
Yeah. So just because somebody starts a new business, they might get press or headlines or things like that. That doesn't mean that it works or is good or is like pays people or is sustainable. You never know what's going on. So yeah. That's why I say that. I don't mean I'm great in the ways that I'm great, and I feel like I'm getting to understand those. But
for sure,
when I sit next to you, I sit in my home office. I share a home office with Allie, and I sit next to her and I watch her do stuff. And I turn around at the end of the day. I'm like, oh, what'd you do today? And she like pulls up, I designed this, I made this, I did this other call, I did this other thing, signed a new contract for blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I like really struggled to like get this website content like to make sense and be persuasive. Like it's just the speed and it's just a different.
It's so efficient.
It's a different thing. Yeah.
It's wonderful, man. So Adam, like, I feel like I kind of, got into it a bit, but what were you like as a child? We'll switch directions here. Like, do you feel like any specific childhood traits are like, frontline now, or do you feel like you just kind of developed into what you are? Because I know that you had some experience working on the farm, and that will that kind of lends itself to a more scrappy mindset. You know what I mean? It's a very blue collar situation.
Yeah. I think of a couple of things that I didn't know, that are a bit like, at the time I didn't understand who I was, I think, but looking back now, I'm like, oh, those were formative and a good clue as to what I would be doing in the future. But one was, I grew up on a farm, and when you're 8 years old, you can join 4-H, and I joined 4-H, and I took I showed my pigs in 4-H,
Okay.
and you can show up to 4 pigs, but I had, I think, 10 the first year. And so my dad went with me to their little bank, and I got a small business loan, which I signed a paper. I'm sure it's like not legally binding for an 8-year-old to be on that loan. I'm sure my dad signed it and was like, "Hey, banker, can you?" I grew up in a really small town, so I'm sure he was like, "Can you just like slide him a fake one and then shred it afterwards?" But he did that, and then I went over to the feed mill, and I was like, signed a contract with them where they credit you, and they give you. They're like, "I'll give you feed. You're going to pay me back in 4 months or 5 months after you sell the pigs." So you're sort of like, it doesn't cost, it's like it doesn't cost anything to do that. That's how farming works in general. It's like most of it is built on loans, working through things. And so I went through all that. I sold stuff. I got a check for the pigs that I sold. I took that check. My dad and I went when I was 8 to the bank, and I got all the cash. It was like thousands of dollars probably. And then he walked, it was a small town. So we walked 1 block, and we went to the feed mill. It was like a bank, gas station, feed mill. That was they were in that order.
Strip. Okay.
Yeah. So I went to, there was a lot of wild stuff happened on Saturday night on that part of town. I feel like at the time the gas station probably closed at like 6:30. Like it didn't. There's no reason for it to be open after that.
Right before the sun goes down.
Yeah, and so we went to I went and paid everything. I felt all of that cash go out of my hand, and I didn't care. Like it didn't matter to me. Money didn't feel. I wasn't like excited about money. I wasn't excited about all of it. I just liked having a thing that was mine. Like it was just mine that I did, and I was proud of that. Other kids like worked on their farm or had jobs or would do other things, and I just was like, oh, I help my dad on his farm, and I have my own little thing going on, and I liked that a lot. Looking back on it, I feel very much that's like pretty indicative of what I do in the world. But props to my dad for like making me go through all of that. When I think back on it, it was a big deal. I think the other thing, that my family was just like a community family. If there was like, this happens sometimes in like small towns, small communities, but everybody just knew everything about everyone. Like if we went to a restaurant or a coffee shop, they probably knew everybody in there. Or you could like drive around with my dad, my family. We'd drive around like the countryside or the farmland. And I'm like, who lives there? And he'd be like, this person. They used to who lives there? And just like encyclopedic knowledge of everything. It doesn't have to be that big of an encyclopedia when only 780 people live in the town. So it's easy to, you can stay up to date.
Yeah, for sure.
On that amount of people. And I was just such a community monster in that way. And getting into school and being like, I was in musicals and sports and student council, and I did well academically, and I just did it all. I was like, you can just do everything. You can just be involved. Like I knew I wasn't going to be like a pro. I wasn't like a musician, whatever, but you can just be involved in everything. And I think that involvement in everything without needing to be an expert in everything, where now I feel like you meet so many kids who are like, oh, I can't play baseball because I'm not, these other things, or like, maybe you just like playing baseball. I mean, there's like a trillion 42-year-old men who every Saturday go drink a bunch of beers and play softball together.
Yeah.
But like somewhere when you're an 8-year-old or 9-year-old, if you're not in the top 12 of your age, you feel bad. And it's just some of that stuff is silly. And I was fortunate to grow up in a space where that hadn't, just due to there was only so many 16-year-olds in high school, we got to do everything. And now I'm like, hey, I want to roast coffee. I could probably learn to do it myself. I can probably do it. I could probably make a coffee roasting business if I wanted to. Like I just always felt like I could do things if I wanted to. My family was a lot like that. Yeah, my family was just a lot like, we can help. Like we can go do stuff, So those two things I feel like I didn't think of them like my personality, but they just shaped so much of my, like who I was, what I was into. And it shows up a lot now.
That's
For
cool,
sure.
man.
What was little kid Deangelo like?
Oh man, I used to cry a lot. So I'm a
Used to
very,
cry.
yeah, I'm a very sensitive individual. So like,
Well, I'm thinking of it like it's different if you're like someone startles you and kind of yells and then you cry like a kid does. Sometimes they
uh,
like wince out of drama, or if you're just
yeah,
like poetically sad.
you know what? So really quickly, yes, I'd say that there were moments where it was like a poetic sadness. It was like, oh man, one day I have to die, you know.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I was just like, just really sensitive. So I just kind of like did my own thing, you know. I remember being like I remember being really frustrated that people didn't get certain things at school. You
Hmm.
know, the teacher would be explaining things and then she would explain it again and she would have to explain it again. I'm like, man, this is not fun. Like, you know, guys, if y'all like, I'll show y'all how to do this. If we could just move
You
on.
were frustrated because you got it and
Mm-hmm.
other people weren't.
Mm-hmm. And
Mm.
then like, cause I used to, like I had friends, right? But like, I didn't have a lot of people to hang out with. So I would just think a lot. And so like one day I remember I was like, man, your comfort zone is not the standard. And I was definitely not in high school. I may have been entering middle school. And so I'm like, yeah, that's not fair that I'm like forcing the things that I know on other people. I think I was like fourth grade. And so, like I said, I was really curious. So I would just tinker with stuff. I would find, I walked around with my head down for the first probably like 14 or 15 years of my life.
Mm.
I mean, I have a nice sized head and I'm sure my neck wasn't a fan of it, but I would just be so like engulfed in what's on the ground. I used to
I love
find
how
like,
that's what you're like. My head was down, not because I wasn't sad, but it was just heavy,
it
and my
was
neck was underdeveloped for
it,
you know.
the type of headquarters situation I had going on. But I remember being just so curious, like finding things on the ground, putting them in my pocket. And bruh, I think about this all of the time. As a child, I would be like, man, I wish there was a thing that would just tell me everything. And like Google is that thing now, right? But like,
Yeah, you got that sort of.
we definitely have it. But you know, before all of that, it was like, you know, there weren't very many search engines. It was like Ask Jeeves or whatever. And then Google, like in its infancy, had very limited knowledge. And then I wanted something a bit more deeper, like tell me where I lost my keys at. Like tell me where I put all my pencils. Like, you know, that sort of situation. And so I don't know, man. I was just a very curious kid and
The Apple tile. So you got that. You invented
yeah.
that sort of.
All of these ideas I've had, you know.
Yeah.
So but no, I was just really curious, man. I like to hang out by myself because at a point it was like hanging with another person was stressful because like I said, I like to learn things and sometimes I have thoughts that just, you know, I have to attend to. So someone else's opinion on those thoughts or like someone else trying to pull me in a different direction that wasn't always my favorite. Now, like I do have friends, obviously, like I'm not an island. No man is an island.
Hmm.
But I don't know. Yeah, man, it was just a lot of isolation.
Well, I relate to sometimes like me and my brother and sister, we all like read a ton. Like we read a lot. Like the way you talk about getting into YouTube or listening to podcasts is the way I read books. Like I just read so much. And I'm not necessarily a fast reader either. Like you assess next to people sometimes. I'm like, oh, y'all swapping these pages real quick. Like it's not about like, I just was always curious in that way. And I felt like, oh, I got to read these things or whatever. And when you're around other people, and if you grow up in an environment, you know, like not to say that the growing up in a farming, like rural community is lacking intelligence. It's definitely, it's a different type of intelligence
For sure.
that's there, but it wasn't like whatever mine was. Like, I don't, you know, it's like I go back and hang out with my people who still live there that I was friends with before. It's like we're doing different stuff or curious about different things or like trying to understand and like, you know, get into some, yeah. So it can be very isolating when you become that person, when you're around a bunch of people who are like, okay, cool, we're all friends. And then 3 months later, you're now like have a lot of information about a new topic that feels like, okay, I don't know how to like, I'm different now. Like I've learned new things now, or I've changed, but I don't know if you all are, and how does that work? And what do we supposed, you know, it could be an isolating thing.
It was rough because it was like, it wasn't just like outside of my house. Even now I'm very different from the people in my family, you know? So it definitely took some like acclimating, but luckily my mom and me being a very sensitive person like went hand in hand, you know what I'm saying? So that was
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah, no, we're all shaped. Yeah, we're all shaped by we're all shaped by all that stuff, and it's
Mm-hmm.
hard. It's like we ask every person who comes on here, right? It's like, what do you like as a kid? How's that shape you today? And then you start to listen to people. You're like, oh my gosh, this is like, it's incredible. And in a bunch of ways, it shapes people. Even the stuff that's hard,
Mm-hmm.
20 years later, you're like, all right, I actually developed some really strong muscles coming out of all of that. Reminds me of
Mm-hmm.
they talk about that, like a baby bird coming out of an egg. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you break the egg for it, it doesn't develop the strength in its wings to be able to fly. Like it needs to
Mm-hmm.
struggle. And entrepreneurship, being self-taught, all of those things are like, you've got to be comfortable struggling. You've got to almost seek out struggling. Like, what do I not understand right now? Where do I feel incompetent? Like, where do I feel like I'm not able to accomplish something that I want to accomplish, and then figure out how to close the gap there. And I watch so many people be really scared to, especially people who are like well trained and successful and credentialed and have an MBA and a whatever. I'm like, you need to go fail publicly and embarrassingly, as much as you can stomach it for a while, and then keep going. I think, and then learn and get better and improve and change and all of that stuff. It just feels like the people we've had on this podcast who inspire me so much, and we get to know what they're up to. It's because they were, I don't know, they put themselves in the spot to risk something and struggle and not really know what's going on. I feel like every time I do small business coaching. So I coach small businesses and teams. And every time I leave something where someone has shared like the real struggle that they're dealing with, we try to work on that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like they're at their weakest spot. It's like their most vulnerable, sensitive spot that is like trauma from their past and the way their brain is wrong and the way they don't believe in themselves and the way they don't have the right information. And as soon as when I get to hear all of that, that's the most inspiring stuff. I like leave. I'm like, okay, cool. I can learn from this person who, like the struggle is where you learn stuff. You can listen to a podcast about how successful people are, check out their Instagram about how cool their whole life is, but there's not much to learn from all of that, really. And there's not much to learn when, I don't know, sometimes when our business is going really well or when things are humming or you and I are getting some really nice feedback from listeners of this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
It's really cool. And I like that. And I need that stuff is like fuel for the engine for sure. But you don't need to be listening to that all the time, you just end up doing boring stuff.
Bingo. You have to kind of split the difference, You can't just do what people tell you to do.
Yeah. It's like I like when people gas me up because it's gas. It's like it is motivating to be. Someone's like, "This was awesome." We had a client yesterday into this meeting that we had worked through. It had been really hard. That me and another teammate had like really spent way too much time trying to figure something out. And at the end of the whole meeting, the client was like, "This was really helpful," and was like in a sincere way that like over Zoom looked into our eyeballs and said it in a thing where I'm like, this is a business owner who's got a trillion things going on. And they felt relief for a little bit because of a thing that we did. And I was like, that's awesome. We got there because I could tell all the times that there was a struggle where like they're struggling to feel relief or they're feeling stressed or tense. We just kept exploring all of that. You gotta like, if you're listening to this, you gotta like dive into that stuff and you said this earlier, but just be comfortable with being uncomfortable. If you can do that, you can do just about anything, really. And if you can't do that, you're probably not gonna learn any new tricks, really. So,
and I mean, man, to be honest, like life isn't much like it used to be, right? Like you just work the same job for years and years, and the world is changing so fast that your job may not exist in the next few years, and so you have to be actively learning and seeking.
Truth.
That's rough.
Truth.
So, Adam, real quick, I have to ask you this because you've talked so much about running a business and everything. How do you decompress from work and like go into like brother Adam or like friend Adam or
It's on
husband
a
Adam,
different, yeah.
and take off the entrepreneurship hat because like I'm sure you sit down with dinner at your wife. She's not too much interested in like numbers and ideas and stuff. She's like, I mean, well, okay, so she's probably interested in ideas.
A very
But she,
real thing that happens often
okay,
is my wife, who is my business partner, and I are somewhere that isn't work or even during work and
yeah,
is,
yeah, yeah.
I don't want to talk about work right now. And that's like just a flare that gets thrown up and it gets respected no matter which of us says it. And which is really difficult. It's like difficult because I'd be sometimes like, um, yeah. So because we both, when we have inspiration or we feel things, we want to share all that. It's like very passionate. Having a third business partner was really amazing. Allie and I agreed to not talk about things that should be discussed in front of Ashley. Like we weren't going to exclude her from conversations because it would be very easy to feel terrible through all of that. It's been really healthy for us.
Mm-hmm.
How do I decompress? Is, it feels like introverts are getting a moment on the internet where they're getting respected and understood. I'm the opposite of that. So if I need to decompress, I go to a soccer match where there's like 20,000 people in a stadium. I go and talk to some acquaintances. Like I love my inner circle. And then I love my second. It was like that community kid that I talked about earlier needs some space. And that kid hasn't gotten much love during COVID. The COVID world and all the things related to it haven't left a lot of space for that dude. But that dude's making a comeback. He's figuring him, he's making himself known and he's figuring himself out a bit. But that's it. I'm like, what was I telling? I was like, hey, I have a friend who was trying to hang out. I was like, can you hang out Friday night? I was like, I have late work. And they're like, oh, you'll be exhausted. We can hang out Saturday. I go, no, I meant like, yes, I'll have a big day Friday. So I need to like go do some silliness, somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like I need to have too many drinks, walk around and eat food that is good and see some strangers and high five them or give them a fist bump or whatever.
Yes. It's funny that you say that because we've hung out, times and I'm like, we're having a great time, but it's like you're decompressing, and it's funny because it's a lot sillier and you might have like ideas, but they're going to be like, you're like, hey, let's produce a whole soundtrack in here. Let's rap over it.
Yeah.
In this bar. Yeah. I mean, nah, man, that's.
But so I think that there's not like the world has preferred extroverts so much for in business and in communities and in whatever, like when we're running, our business used to run in-person workshops once a week that had between 15 to 40 people that I was leading those workshops. And so like there was no like lacking of that space. But the introverts on our team or in our business were exhausted by that. That was like, they were like emptying themselves. And so what COVID, what all that has done is sort of reprioritized around introverts, which is like this business. Most of life is built around extroverts, school, business, sports. So I'm learning like, how do I self-care as an extrovert? How do I fuel up with people? And then the other part of it being getting into, like I said, stand-up paddleboarding or hiking or just getting out and stuff. It's like I had to find some hobbies I'm like very into. And I had to promise to not turn those into businesses. That was because it's just where my brain goes all the time.
Listen, man, hold on, Adam. I feel like our listeners need that piece of advice too. You do not have to turn every hobby into a business.
So the coffee roasting is a great example of a thing that I got really passionate about. I was super into. I was like the most, I don't know, I feel like I'm the smartest amateur coffee person. Maybe that's probably not true, but aside from people who like work in it daily, and I just kept trying to turn it into a business. I did turn it is a business, and I turned it into one. And then now I got people text me being like, hey, I'm out of coffee and I want to support your business. And I was like, oh man, I got to go roast for 4 hours on a Sunday. And it's likely I turn that back into a hobby and stop it from being a business. And I'm like so excited for just doing things for fun in that space, because that was a hobby that I turned into a business. Then I lost some of the playfulness with it or the silliness around it that I like so much.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's it. It's like I love hanging. Like decompress is hang out with people, read, and then get outside, move around. Doing computer work can be a very stationary job, and Farm Kid Adam doesn't like really vibe with the body doesn't work well as in a stationary job. So
Nope.
I read an entrepreneur who had actually talked about the best thing that he did for his own business was one, got a therapist and started saying some things like that. And the therapist came back to him and was like, have a hobby, like go, you don't have to spend 20 hours a day doing this stuff. And he was like, I want this business to grow and to be incredible. And I want to start spending way more time doing things that I love doing.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, I just got on this journey of finding hobbies that I loved, like that I really loved. Not like sometimes people are like, go find a hobby. And you're like, okay, I'm going to start knitting or baking bread is what everybody did during COVID, right? It's like at some point you're like, I don't actually love baking bread passionately, but you got to find something you're actually passionate about that's not a business, and then try to fill that up as much as you can, and then force your business to live within the constraints that you give it within that window. And so this guy, I remember him talking about, he would be like, I scheduled, he got really into stand-up paddleboarding was how I gave it a shot. He got really into stand-up paddleboarding, and he would be like, I got so excited about going to new spots or new times or going during the day when there's not a lot of boats out on the lake or a river or whatever, and being like, I want to go on a 6-hour long paddleboard session. And so he's like, I'd get there early. I was like, I got to get all this work done. And he's like, I took my laptop, I'd do all this in the truck and I'd just get it all finished as fast as I could. He's like, the business just got healthier because you stopped giving yourself this God complex where you feel like you got to control and touch and run every single little thing. And we've had a lot of people on this podcast who are parents who having a kid sort of just does this like upgrade to their life, not because you become a better person if you're a parent, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but you just have constraints and you start making these things work within constraints. And then after that, like cool stuff starts to happen. And so I learned that those hobbies are actually healthy. They make the business better. And I got to like remind myself of that. I've got to like take care of myself.
I need some hobbies too. My hobbies are very sedentary. I'm going to buy a bike, So if you're listening to this and you have a bike, you can sell it to me.
You can have mine. Mine has I tried biking as a hobby and I does not stick. So
yeah, I used to ride bikes as a kid. Me and my brother, I have an older brother, and I have 2 younger brothers and 2 sisters. I had to run them. I got to run them all down. Anytime I mention one, I run them off. But me and my older brother would just ride bikes for hours, from probably like 11, something like that. You go get your bike, and then you ride until 9 when the sun is down.
Well, a farm kid, me had a bike, and we were like riding into school in the summer and like play basketball or go to football summer practice or lift weights or whatever.
Yeah. So Adam, we're wrapping this up, man. I got one more question for you. I feel like you've done, what I'm saying, a good amount of reading. If there's like a million books out there, you probably read like 300,000. I'm just putting numbers on.
Yeah. Sure.
But no, in reality, I feel like you're somebody who understands the power of words and like the law of attraction. I feel like we've had conversations about this before. So what we're going to do right here, as we're closing this out, we're going to, kind of speak some good on the business, just on our lives, just in general, to speak some good. So if there's one thing that you want to happen for your business more than anything, what would that be?
Someday when our business shuts down or closes or goes out of business or gets sold or exited, that there's 10,000 people at its funeral, theoretically. I think that to me is like, when I think of the same thing as life, of like, what's a good life, is you could tell like, what's the nature of a person's funeral like? How are people talk about them? You don't always get people to talk about you that way while you're alive. How many people did you touch, impact, those sort of things. What's a good life look like as a person? I would say the same thing is true as a business, that there's a lot of impact, a lot of deep impact, but not a lot. There's some deep impact, but then there's also a lot of impact as well that that your family's better because our business exists, that your friends' lives are better because our business exists, that my cousins' lives are better because our business exists, and that mine is, and our clients and the people we buy stuff from, all of that. I think just like that to me is like a lot of impact deep and a lot of impact wide. It makes a difference. I would really, really love for that to happen. It also has to happen financially. And for a long time, I didn't understand it that way. I was like, I grew up in a world of a lot of nonprofits, a family who like started and runs and leads and does a lot of those things. I didn't always understand the financial mechanics of things. It's like I learned every part of business before I learned that one. And it's got to spin off a lot of wealth in a lot of different directions for that to work sustainably over time. So, those are the thing. That's what I want.
Hey, man,
that'll happen. That's gonna happen. We're on track for that one.
That'll happen for sure. But the fact that you acknowledge it, you know what I mean, and you say it out loud, there's a universal force that is listening and is working in our favor. So there it is. Adam,
I'm down for it.
This is wonderful, bro. We get to do this all the time.
I know.
And now
it's I'll close this off. I know both of us are like hosts of this podcast, so I don't know which one of us is supposed to end it. If you're listening to this and you're ever curious about anything, whether it comes to business, or you're like, I wish more people would talk about this, hit us up on social media or our website, or we respond to pretty much anything. Just ask questions. Be like, I want more people to talk about what it's like to be self-taught, or to raise a parent, or to how to learn new things, or to raise a parent, or to to be a parent and raise a child. You can. Yeah, if you have to take care of older people in your family while also being an entrepreneur, how do you do all of that? Because what we find, Deangelo and I love going and finding experts or people who have experience and asking them questions, kind of like we did today. And that's what our job is, is to go find that stuff and bring it to you. So also, if you ever want to do anything, if you go to Apple, specifically Apple, the rest of them don't matter as much, and you write a review that says really wonderful things, and you give us 5 stars on there, that helps more people bump into all of this, and that matters. And it is really sad how important that is to getting more listeners onto a podcast, but it's really important. So if you do that, that would be really nice and wonderful.
Hey, man, we appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Love it. Bye. I don't know how we're supposed to. We need to have like a catchy ending.
I don't know. Stop recording.
Where you're like, dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, it's like